My name is Manfred Helber and I'm a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in the category Cloud and Data Center. This video is a complete live demo video where you will see all the relevant steps to deploy such a 3-node Azure Stack HCI cluster. Let's jump to the demo environment. I have installed the Windows Admin Center. You can review the module about how to install and configure Windows Admin Center if you are not familiar in how to install and deploy Windows Admin Center. In Windows Admin Center, I can start with add and then create a new server cluster. This is what we want to do in this live demo session here. And we want to create an Azure Stack HCI based cluster with all servers in one site. So Azure Stack HCI is the operating system. All servers are in one site. Let's start with creating this new cluster. Here we can see the powerful Azure Stack HCI deployment wizard in Windows Admin Center. We have 5 major steps. Get started, networking, then the clustering part, the storage configuration, and finally the SDN. But we will skip the SDN step. So let's go to the first step here, where we have to specify our username and password. I already used credentials here, so Windows Admin Center expects that I will use these credentials I've already stored. If I want to use different credentials, I can change them here. Now I have to enter the computers I want to use for this Azure Stack HCI cluster. You have the information, enter the computer name, IP address, or full qualified domain name. I will start with the D102 minus Azure Stack HCI, and I have a node 31. I want to use this node for the planned Azure Stack HCI cluster. And I have to add 2 additional nodes here. It's searching for this node. The node was found, and I will add this one here. I will also add the node 32. And I will also add the node 33 because I want to build a 3-node cluster here. Searching for node 3. So I have a warning here. The provided servers are not the same manufacturer model which is required to continue. Let's wait till the validation has finished. So because actually you have seen 2 nodes, or 1 node was ready, the other one was validating, and this error message was removed because the wizard realized, oh, these are all 3 identical machines. But the information is important to keep in mind when you review the video module about Azure Stack HCI basics and Azure Stack HCI hardware requirements. You will learn that we have specific requirements, and here we are working with virtual machines. So I have 3 nodes. I have Azure Stack HCI pre-installed on them, so I'm ready to proceed with the next step. I already joined these machines to the domain. If you review the video module preparing of Azure Stack HCI hosts and Active Directory domain, you see the steps where you can join the nodes to your domain. Windows Admin Center can also join the machines to the domain at these steps, but I prefer to manually join them to have already the Active Directory domain authentication and so on. But it depends on your preference if you do it before you start the wizard or if you let the wizard join the machines to the domain. Let's go to next, to install features. Here we can see we have missing features on all of the nodes, and it's planned to install them here because I wanted you to see which features are required. You see the data deduplication, the HyperV, the BitLocker drive encryption, data center bridging, failover clustering, network ATC, Active Directory module for PowerShell, and HyperV module for Windows PowerShell. And this wizard will deploy this on every node. in a 2-node cluster on both nodes, in a 4-node cluster on all the 4 nodes, here in the 3-node cluster on these 3 nodes. And I wanted to see a small issue we run into because we are working with virtual machines. So it will need some time till all these roles and features are installed. But we will see that in a virtualized environment, actually in this wizard, we will run into issues with Hyper-V. The error message will be something like nested virtualization is not enabled on the target host. And I will show you how you can fix this. It's easy. It's only related to the virtual machines. Let's wait for the installation of these components, and then we will see the result here. So as I mentioned, we have the roles installed and features installed except the Hyper-V role. And here we can see, please ensure nested virtualization is enabled in order to successfully install Hyper-V on these nodes here. I know that nested virtualization is enabled. So what I will do, I will open a new tab with Windows Admin Center, and I will connect in Windows Admin Center to my servers here in the Windows Admin Center server list. I will add the servers here. Let's add the server number 31. I will use my stored credentials here. Oh, sorry, I've chosen add cluster. I don't want to add clusters. I want to add servers. There's no cluster existent actually on this machine. So I will add the server 31. I will also add the server 32. This step is only required if you're working with virtual machines. On physical hosts, if everything is configured correctly, this shouldn't happen. In the virtual machines, it also shouldn't happen because nested virtualization is activated, but something went wrong actually in this deployment wizard, so it doesn't realize correctly that we have the nested virtualization enabled on the machines. And let's the third node here also. And specify the credentials. And as you can see, I can connect to the servers and I can select the roles and features here in the list. And here you will see I will be successful in installing Hyper-V. So I can select Hyper-V, click on install, will calculate the dependencies, and I will reboot. The server should reboot automatically if required. Yes. So Hyper-V will be installed on this server, and I can jump to the next server. And continue with the server 32. The same steps. To install role and features, for sure you can also script this via PowerShell. I will select Hyper-V, click on install, calculating the dependencies, reboot the server automatically, yes. Here the installation is already finished, and I can switch to the server 33 here and do the same. Roles and features, select Hyper-V in the list, and click on install. and reboot the server automatically. You know, in a physical environment, I mentioned this is not required, so our deployment wizard will do this for us. In a virtual environment, it usually takes a few seconds till the server reboots, so I can refresh here. Let's check the verification result, and we can see, wow, no, everything is installed. So as I mentioned, it's only an error in the actual version. If you try this with a later version of Windows Admin Center, maybe this is already fixed. But for me, it was important to show you this issue because it's great to test and evaluate and demonstrate Azure Stack HCI with virtual machines. And so it's a little bit disappointing if you run into issues there. So let's go to next. Install updates. This is the great step to install updates here, and usually we'll also see some updates here, but I will not install the updates here because we have a dedicated module about update management in Azure Stack HCI, and we will keep this updates here for this video module where I explain this in detail. So you can see there are updates available. I can see in detail which updates are missing, what's recommended to install here, and usually this should be the same types and amounts of updates. When I go to next, you have a step install hardware updates. This is only available on Azure Stack HCI integrated systems. I'm working with virtual machines, and so we'll see here there are no hardware updates. There are even no hardware updates when I click on retry. So it's only for integrated systems. I can read this here. It's a benefit of this integrated system types. Next step is about server restart if it's needed. So, okay, things it needs a restart for the servers. Let's restart the machines here. The great thing is I don't have to connect to the machines and restart them and manually execute the process. I just have this central control plane where I can restart, where I can install updates, where I can install features. So now we have to wait till the servers are back up and running to proceed with the next step. So now the servers are up and running again and they are ready. So they are ready for the next step. I will click on next and choose for the networking. We have two options, use network ATC and manually configure host settings. Network ATC is the intent-based network configuration where you work with, let's say, something like network configuration templates. So it's great if you have a complex network configuration where you want to standardize the network configuration with these intents or templates, and where you maybe have several clusters to deploy where you want to ensure that you have the identical network configuration. For our single cluster with 3 nodes, it's easier to choose the manual host configuration, and the advantage is that we see all the required steps. In this ATC configuration, we have the advantage that if anybody changes network settings, they are reconfigured. And if we add nodes, they also receive the same network configuration. So let's go to next, networking. So first, the network adapters are validated. Actually, we have the validation. You can already see we can refresh the list. We can enable disabled adapters. We can disable enabled adapters. We can include adapters and exclude. Maybe you will find some network adapters in the list you will not use for Azure Stack HCI, and then you can exclude them even if you don't want to disable them. So a typical network adapter we would exclude is an hardware-based management interface. I'm usually using the hardware management as a dedicated configuration, but sometimes servers have a configuration, it's called a hybrid interface, where this interface can be used for hardware-based remote management and also for the operating system usage. And this could be such an adapter you wouldn't want to exclude here. So we have to wait till the adapters are validated before we can click on Next to proceed with the next step here. Yeah, the verification is completed. And I can see which adapters are in the servers. I can see here the adapters, speed, the MAC address, the name of the adapter, the status. So in this step, everything looks good, green, up and running. For sure, you know from the Azure Stack HCI hardware requirements module that we need specific network interface adapters. So we need usually minimum 8 logical interfaces or 8 physical interfaces, depending how you do it, because you have to separate each traffic and you have to have each traffic redundant. So let's select the management adapters. So the management adapter is for host operating system management. There are two options. I can build a team for the management interface. Then I have to select exactly 2 adapters. Teaming supports the switch embedded teaming that is used here supports up to 8 adapters, but for the management interface, Microsoft says, okay, exactly 2 in this configuration because I have 2 adapters that are in the management subnet. I could also decide to use a single management network adapter, and this is what I will do because I'm working in this virtual environment and I want to have an easy, simple configuration here to be able to showcase you all the steps, but not to spend too much time in this configuration tasks. I will use a single adapter. Changes are pending. The adapter was one of the recommended, and I know the first one I have planned for management. Then I click on Apply and Test. These buttons are great because they apply the settings and they test if the setting works. For the management adapter, they test if the host OS is reachable, if the communication will work, and this was very fast. Changes were applied and everything is green and up and running. So let's go to next. Here we can decide for how to configure a switch for the virtual machine workload to connect to the physical network. Will we use one huge switch with all the adapters where we have the storage and the virtual machine traffic on it? Yes, it will be separated, but it will be on one switch embedded teaming switch. Or will we use a virtual switch for the virtual machines and set switch and switch embedded teaming switch for the virtual machines with up to 8 adapters if I have so many adapters in my server. And I will use 2 physical interfaces for SMB traffic. My network interface cards number 2 and 3. No, it's different here. Here it's 2 and 4, 2 and 3, 2 and 4. So these network adapters with the automatic private IP address, these adapters are for SMB traffic. This is what I have planned with these adapters here. And I also could decide for creating one switch embedded teaming switch for the virtual machines and one switch embedded teaming switch for the virtual machine workload. So these are the 3 options here. Or you decide to skip the virtual machine switch creation and you can create this virtual machine switch later via Windows Admin Center. So it depends on your configuration which option you will choose. We will configure the virtual switch later when we create virtual machines. This is also possible. RDMA settings. You should work with RDMA in production environments. Please review the video module about Azure Stack HCI hardware requirements to learn more about the benefits of RDMA. In a few words, with RDMA, you reduce the CPU workload, you reduce the latency, and you increase the throughput So everything is important. Here in our virtual environment, I will not configure RDMA for the virtual machines. Now I have to define the networks. I have to define the networks here for Ethernet 1 or Ethernet 2 here. This is my SMB1 network. This one here is my SMB2 network. This one here is again my SMB1 network. And this one is my SMB2 network. So I will specify the networks and for sure also the IP addresses on the individual adapters. Important is the name of each of these adapters. So that is the same name on each host. So the last one here, this will be my virtual machine traffic, where we mentioned we will configure a virtual switch on this virtual machine traffic later. So for the SMB networks, we need a specific subnet or network we specify here. Let's take this one, 101, and I will take the host 11 for the first one. And I have a subnet mask here. Please keep in mind, for really configuring RDMA, we need a VLAN ID here to ensure that the traffic prioritization can be configured for ROCKY traffic. For ROCKY traffic is required. For IWAP traffic, it's optional. Yes, I can see I should not use the APIPA address. I didn't configure it. This was the default value here. And I should check the IP addresses because actually I have some misconfiguration here. Yes, this is correct because I'm actually entering the values and let's say it's not very comfortable, this list here regarding how to enter the values. Copy and paste is a little bit difficult in this web-based formula here. But besides this, it's great to have this single step where we configure all the network settings. So I don't have to move forward and back to configure these things. I don't have to write down some notes to remember the settings. I have everything here in this configuration table. And so it's only the work to fill it out. If I would prepare a PowerShell script to configure my servers, I would also have to specify this here. So I like this very much. The handling could be optimized, and I'm sure this will be optimized, but it's really great. Let's imagine if we would have chosen the network ATC configuration, then we would have had the situation that we configure the intents here, the templates. It's the same work, but we can reuse these intents. And so this is, as I mentioned, a great thing for additional hosts if we have additional hosts to add and additional clusters to add. Okay, I would say this looks good. Okay, I have to change this subnet mask. It looks good. I hope I have no typo in there. If I should have a typo, I will see at the end of this line in the status where we actually have the status pending, I will see a warning or an error, and then I can fix this. In the advanced, I can work on the jumbo packet size if I want to work with jumbo frames, and I can configure the encapsulation overhead. There should be a remark that I should be careful with these configurations. No, there's no warning here, but for sure you know that your switch must be capable to work on these jumbo frames if you configure them here. So if you configure the frames here larger than the switch can manage, you will lose data in each block. Let's apply and test these settings. And let's see what happens. And for sure, these are several network interfaces, 3 nodes with 3 network interfaces in each of the nodes. The management interface is already configured. And this means we have to wait a few minutes here till the configuration is written to all of these nodes. So the changes have applied already to the last adapter, now also to the first 2 adapters. And you see, we already had a lot of green marks here, so success values. But now all the data is written, and there's again a testing of the connectivity. So now the second connectivity test was successful. Everything passed here successfully. And now I could apply and test again, or I can go to the next step, clustering. And for me, this is fine. The values are fine. These are the values I planned. Now I can choose next for clustering. So in every step, we have a short test at the beginning. Here again, checking a few things for clustering. And as you know, for building a cluster with Azure Stack HCI, we need the Azure Stack HCI certified hardware, and we need a successful validated cluster validation report. So it's required to have this validation here. So I will click on validate, and here we can see, hang on this going to take a few minutes. I'm 1% in this progress, gathering data about the nodes, and have also a progress bar here in the notification at the upper right-hand side here, running cluster validation, here actually gathering data about the nodes. So the validating is going on, 54% still gathering data about the nodes. And as you know, these progress bars, they are not linear, so it sometimes jumps a bit to the next step. And after we gather the data about the nodes, the information will be validated. And at the end of the cluster validation, we will have a validation report. And we have to carefully to review the report, because if everything is successful there, everything is green, then this report is good for documentation, to have it to show everything was good in validating this cluster. If you have a warning, you should evaluate this. Maybe I will have a warning because of missing updates. Maybe I will have a warning because of my very specific network configuration here with the virtual machines. So I can decide if this warning should be fixed or if the warning is not critical. If there's an error, I have to fix it before I can proceed with the cluster configuration. Let's download the report here. The report is downloaded successfully, and I can access the validation report. I can use this validation report and review the content on the report. At the bottom of the browser, I can see the report file, and I can open it here, and I can see, oh no, no warning. Everything is successful, inventory, network. But as you can see, I have a lot of details in this report, and if there should be a warning, I can work on this. Let's go to next. I want to create the cluster now. It's checking the DHCP availability. In my environment, I have a DHCP server, so I will use a dynamically provided IP address, and the cluster will use the name D102 minus Azure Stack HCI cluster 30. I could also specify one or more static addresses. In advanced, I can decide to add all the storage or only selected disks. I will add all the storage. and I want to use all networks. Here I could specify again networks I will not use in the cluster. So let's create exactly this cluster here. Again, the information, hang on, this is going to take a few minutes. Configuring the cluster service on node Azure Stack HCI 31, then 32, and then 33. So everything is configured from this central wizard from the Windows Admin Center. So I never connect to the nodes after I pre-installed them. So if I receive the nodes pre-installed from my OEM, I only have to connect them to the network, and the full deployment is done here in the Windows Admin Center. For sure, you also can deploy with the PowerShell. You can deploy parts with the failover cluster manager, but the deployment via Windows Admin Center is really a great experience, and I would recommend to you to test this experience on your own to see how powerful it is and to learn where you have to be careful. Here I can read, make sure to create a cluster witness once you have finished this wizard, because this is not part of the Windows Admin Center failover cluster deployment for Azure Stack HCI. Next step is storage. I have a button here to erase all the drives. This is great if you are using a setup with physical or virtual machines where you already had deployed storage spaces direct and you want to erase the drives to ensure that they can be reused. This erase drives deletes all the metadata on the machines. So let's check the drives. And here we can see each of the server has 4 drives. They are unspecified here, but we have a symmetric storage layout. What we learned is required for Azure Stack HCI. This information is in the module about Azure Stack HCI hardware requirements. And here we can also see information like firmware, the location, so in which slot, on which server the disk is located. This is helpful in a physical environment when you realize maybe you have an unbalanced configuration or you maybe are missing a disk that should be in the configuration. This might happen if maybe a disk was not fully put into the hot plug cage here. Okay, let's go to next and validate the storage. Now storage spaces direct validates the capability of these disks to be poolable. So it's now looking for poolable disks to build a storage spaces direct pool with the selected disks that will be compatible with storage spaces direct. And yes, it looks successful. I have a success for disks for the file share, storage enclosures, and so on. Here again, we have a report we can download. And in this detailed report, we have all the information about storage spaces direct, the disks, the disk connectivity, and the compatibility of these disks with storage spaces direct. In the next step, we will enable storage spaces direct. Via PowerShell, this would be the commandlet enable cluster S2D. Let's enable the storage spaces direct functionality here in this Azure Stack HCI cluster, in this future Azure Stack HCI cluster. Actually, it's an Azure Stack HCI OS based cluster, and now the software-defined storage will be provided on this cluster via enabling storage spaces direct, starting the health providers, and so on. Many steps actually happen in the background because the cluster performance history is created as a dedicated volume, the storage bus layer is created, the wizard decides if we have cache drives or not, and so on. And after this, our cluster has the software-defined storage layer available where we can build additional volumes and where we can put our workload on there. So a final report about this deployment step, and I really would recommend to you to review all these reports and to exactly check if there are warnings. Here I have a warning that says, I don't have any cache drives found. And as we have learned in the Azure Stack HCI hardware requirements, in full flash deployments, cache drives are optional. Only if we have hybrid deployments with hard disks, cache drives are required. So the next step is SDN, but I mentioned we will skip SDN, and I cannot configure SDN if there's no external virtual switch configured. So let's skip this step here, and now I get the information. That's it. We are all done here. Go to the connection list. Yes, I will do so. We have the cluster D102 Azure Stack HCI cluster 30, and I will connect to this cluster here. Sometimes when you first connect to the cluster, it will take some time till all the content is loaded correctly. If you don't have all the tools on the left-hand side, my recommendation is to go back to the Windows Admin Center list by clicking on Windows Admin Center and then clicking on the cluster again to reload the information, and now you can see everything is here. A few important information. The Azure Connectivity, this cluster is not yet registered. We have a dedicated module in this video series about registering Azure Stack HCI in Microsoft Azure and activating Azure Arc. So this is the reason why we will not do this here. For explanation for you, I can configure everything in this cluster. I can also create volumes, but as long this cluster is not registered to Azure, I cannot create any new virtual machines. I cannot put any workload on this Azure Stack HCI cluster. An important task after deploying Azure Stack HCI is to go to the settings and review the settings in the for the Azure Stack HCI cluster. You should specify the default path for Hyper-V host settings in the general settings. But before we can specify this, we have to create volumes, and we will see this later in a video module. What we have to configure now is the witness, because actually we don't have a witness. No witness is here. I showed you the information that the cluster deployment wizard told us we have to configure a witness afterwards. We have two witness options. We have the option to configure a cloud witness, or we can configure a file share witness. We will configure a file share witness here. In the video module with the 4-node Azure Stack HCI cluster, you will see the option to configure a cloud witness. But it's not dependent on the number of nodes. So it depends on your scenario. If you prefer a file share witness on an independent server in your environment, the file share witness is on none of these nodes of the cluster. It should be an additional, not a high available server. And if you don't have this server, you can use the cloud witness. For the cloud witness, you need an Azure Storage account name and an Azure Storage account key. I will configure this in the video module about deploying a 4-node cluster. Here we will use the file share witness. The file share witness recommends here to use the credentials I'm using in Windows Admin Center, and I will use the file share on the D102 minus DC01 / witness. It's a file share I created there, and I can see witness resource status is online. When we check this via our Explorer, let's go to the D102 minus DC01 backslash the witness here. Here I see the witness resource. It's not recommended to always have this on the domain controller, but the domain controller is a system I have available here. The domain controller is not part of my 3-node Azure Stack HCI cluster. For sure, I could also use an additional server. You do not need a dedicated witness server, so it's not required to have a server with the witness role on there. You should specify an reliable server, but not a redundant server, because it's important that the witness is available, but that the witness is a single point of failure. So if the witness fails, the witness is not available. This cluster continues to run because in the cluster it's always important to keep the majority of the votes. Each node has a vote, and also the witness has a vote. In a configuration with an equal number of nodes, in the 3-node cluster, my witness actually has no vote, but if a cluster node fails, the witness will receive a vote to allow the cluster to survive an additional node failure. So the witness should be configured always in clusters with an equal node number and an unequal node number. So we have a witness in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 node clusters. Always configure it because of the dynamic quorum configuration we have. The cluster itself decides if the witness will be occupied with a vote or not. Okay, the witness configuration I mentioned, it's not dependent on the number of nodes if we prefer the cloud witness or the FileShare witness. Here we have the typical Hyper-V host settings, and we have some specific Azure Stack HCI settings we will see in a later module when we configure additional hybrid services for Azure Stack HCI. And we will see how to work with this Azure Stack HCI cluster in some of the next video modules. To give you a first impression, a small walkthrough to the configuration in the dashboard, I get an overview about everything that is available here in this configuration. Here I have a warning: storage pool is unable to write a quorum of metadata services. Workload may be interrupted. So they had an issue 7 minutes ago. We will review this in one of the later modules. Maybe there our disks were not all claimed. This was when I created the cluster. In the list of the virtual machines, I actually have no virtual machines. We will create virtual machines later. I have the list of the servers here in my configuration. I can check an inventory of the servers. I see the virtual machines, the usage of the machines. I can see the drives here, including an inventory with detailed information about the drives. I have the volumes, and I mentioned we already have one volume, and this is the cluster performance history. This cluster performance history provides the historical data we have here, because we can switch from the hour to the day to the week if the cluster is already existing for a longer time. So here we can find out if we had some latency peaks or IOPS peaks in the past.